July 25th, 1999. Red Hot Chili Peppers would be live at Woodstock for the second time. Concertgoers would adore the presence of a naked flea as the band began to perform. Following a request from Jimi Hendrix's sister, the band would play tribute to the rock legend, playing the song that they knew the best, Fire. Not even a few seconds after the song began, the camera would zoom in on an actual fire lit up by the crowd. One fire turned into many as the crowd began to either leave or act disorderly. Members of the crowd that night were pissed, swindled, and disgusted by the outrageous treatment of negligence committed by the creators of the event. Griffis Air Force Base would burn that night, leaving behind ashes, drums, and literally tons of garbage. The ground reeked of urine, BO, and tear gas residue. The so-called riot was televised everywhere, resulting in numerous sources covering and distributing their take on what happened that weekend. Many articles covering the event, CF Gate for example, would label this event as the day music died. Q105.7 would label this event as the 9th most dangerous concert in 2011. Is there truth to these claims? Was this an exaggeration? It was estimated that 250 to 400,000 people would be present throughout the technically 4-day event, all citing different experiences. I'm Uncle Unbated, and today's Dark Side of Nostalgia, I'll be explaining the chaos of Woodstock 99. Woodstock 99 was one of those spectacles that would go against people's expectations. In 1969, Woodstock made an impact on the American peace movement, providing support to ideals such as anti-war beliefs, the use of psychedelics, sexual liberation, and political activism. This is important to remember. To the media, Woodstock was an event known for peace, love, and harmony that later evolved into destruction, anger, and sexual bigotry. In between Woodstock 69 to 99, 3 other Woodstocks existed. Woodstock 79, which actually was billed as Celebration 10 years later, excluding the Woodstock name. Woodstock 89, which was also called the Forgotten Woodstock, that took place at the same date and the original site as Woodstock 1969, and featured smaller bands for a fraction of the price of the original. Then we have Woodstock 94, which was known as Woodstock 2, or the second official Woodstock. Despite Woodstock 79 and 89 existing, they were not organized by the original producers. These include Michael Lang, John Roberts, and Joel Roseman. These 3 would come back in 1994 to try to replicate the success of Woodstock 1969, inviting grander acts, adding various activities and services, promoting camping, and documenting it all on pay-per-view. This would come at a cost, and as investors, there was a need to make sure all the time planning was well worth it. And ironically, Woodstock 94 was a financial failure. This was due to too many guests getting in for free. Quoting the Washington Post, promoters said they sold about 190,000 tickets to the 3-day concert. Police estimated the total crowd at closer to 260,000, many of them freeloaders. This number varies by source, with the highest reported being 550,000 on Wikipedia. There were so many people that attended this event, all the policies were pretty much unenforceable. There was not enough security. This included the alcohol policy, which forbids attendees from consuming alcohol. Naturally, people still brought their booze, with very little security could do about it. Woodstock 94 would also spark a negative reputation of commercialization.
This is the anniversary of a historic event. Which one? Watergate.
Country Joe McDonald.
Joe, remember when we did this 25 years ago? No.
A constant stream of advertisements and expensive goods and fees that plunged an attendee's wallet. Woodstock 99 was going to be different. Well, sort of. The producers of the event knew a number of the issues that took place at Woodstock 94. However, a huge factor that would impact the changes was money. Woodstock 99 would be held at Griffis Air Force Base in Rome, New York. The reason was due to its infrastructure, keeping people from sneaking in. A number of corporate sponsorships and non-for-profit organizations took part at the event.
We're here from Albany, where Governor Pataki lives. He's declared this the 3rd biggest city in the state of New York.
There were so many people involved in the event that it's hard to find a definitive answer to all that contributed to it. Culturally speaking, Woodstock aged horribly, evolving in such a way that emphasized on drug use, nudity, mud play, and a great disdain to ideals set by previous generations. Here is what Woodstock 99's culture was known for. Drug use at Woodstock has been embedded within the culture since the beginning. Woodstock 1969 was known for the very potent, questionable blue and brown acid. Some people would be ill, while others would report better experiences.
There is someone giving out some flat blue acid. It is poison. There are 15 people who are very ill from it.
The warning that I've received, you may take it with however many grains of salt you wish, that the brown acid that is circulating around us is not specifically too good.
LSD, mushrooms, nitrous, and various pharmaceuticals could be found throughout. A hefty amount of security would be present at the gate checking people for these substances, which didn't work. People still got in ready to sell and distribute substances to attendees. Spin reported that only one drug arrest was made on Friday. A 19-year-old had 1,100 tabs of acid, almost 55 grand worth, and attempted to sell 6,000 hits to an undercover agent. On Saturday, another drug arrest occurred. A man carrying $16,000 in cash was arrested for selling psychedelic mushrooms. Spin also reported that a 15-year-old girl OD'd on ecstasy and laid unconscious for several days. This goes without saying that drug use always played a part in the culture of Woodstock. But this is a common thing for a lot of music festivals in general. An Australian research paper would study sexual harassment and assault at 2017 and 18 Falls festivals, which are a multi-day music festival that's held in December and January. We will go back to this study a little bit later in the video. I just wanted to mention that out of 500 people that were surveyed, 211, or 47.8% of participants, admitted they consumed substances at music festivals, most common being ecstasy, cannabis, and LSD. 99% would report having at least one alcoholic beverage. There's another study that I want to talk about that was conducted in Colorado, and it interviewed 171 attendees during the Sonic Bloom and Arise music festivals that were held in 2015 and 16. The study was interesting to me for two things. One, it solidifies the idea of how ubiquitous drug use at music festivals really is, especially in America. And also, their conclusion found that this population of novel psychoactive substance users is primarily composed of experienced drug users that endorse use because of low cost, minimal perceived risk, accessibility, and normalization of drug use at music festivals. Drug use at concerts has always been a thing, and Woodstock was no different. During Limp Bizkit's performance, Fred Durst stated,
How many motherfuckers are on drugs tonight?
Whether or not drug use was a factor to the chaos is debatable. One could say that having a ton of angry people high on acid could definitely set an unsettling mood in the perspective of the sober. One source being from the Retroist. An ex-employee of Fortune City was assigned to promote the company at the event. Here was a quote from him. Heavy substance abuse was everywhere. On our first night, when we had closed down, we would find some people passed out along the edges of the tent, many in very rough shape with nowhere to go. They gravitated towards our large tent, and if I remember right, we had a break-in and some stuff from other sponsors were damaged or stolen. Unsurprisingly, our flying discs, empty water bottles, and sun visors remain largely untouched. Drug use at music festivals is everywhere. And honestly, if you look at Woodstock 94, you would find that only about 30 drug-related hospitalizations occurred, which is pretty surprising with the amount of people that attended. Comparatively, if you look at 2016's Sunset Music Festival, it had one of its deadliest years. Out of a crowd of only 50,000, 57 were hospitalized, 25 were arrested on felony offenses, and most tragically, 2 girls in their early 20s OD'd on Molly. The point of this chapter is not about how drug use contributed to the violence at Woodstock 99. Rather, it's only to solidify the idea that drug use is everywhere, especially at festivals such as Woodstock. It's always a debatable subject to consider, but there was something that Woodstock had that many concerts did lack, and that was mud play. The mud became a huge part of Woodstock culture from the beginning. However, it played a much stronger role at Woodstock 94.
The best part is the atmosphere, definitely.
And the worst part?
The worst part? The mud. The mud, yes, definitely the mud.
Woodstock 94 was located at Winston Farm, just west of Saugerties, New York, and it was about 100 miles north of New York City and about 70 miles northeast of the original 1969 event. On the Saturday afternoon of Woodstock 94, it began to storm over the grassy dirt, resulting in the ground to be overly saturated with mud. This would divide the crowd. Some would feel miserable and leave the event early, while others would stay and instead make the most of the event. Dozens began to play in the mud. They would then convert others to join in on the fun. Dozens turned into hundreds as the mud people took over the general majority of the crowd, dubbing the event Mudstock. Mud would even play a role in performances, including Green Day's song Paper Lanterns, where the crowd relentlessly began to throw mud onto the stage. Primus would perform their song My Name is Mud, which it's self-explanatory. Interviews from the media with the mud people display the completely polar opposite in perspectives with how some people saw the mud.
Anywhere you walk in there, you're at least in 2.5, 3-inch mud.
It's solid, yeah, seriously.
It's just getting really gross.
Yeah.
Couldn't even get to the North Stage to see the bands I really wanted to see, and too disappointed to hang around to see the bands that are coming on later tonight.
Hey, let them leave! Let them leave! We have more fun for us! That's all it is. More fun for us.
Woodstock 99 would bring back the mud play, but in a much more profound way. People watching the pay-per-view may notice several attendees bathing in the mud. Some shots include people throwing mud out into the crowd. Then the camera would pan right to reveal about a dozen porta potties chilling with the nearby dirt. Since the water was scarce, some people broke pipes leading to the water fountains and used them as a source of moisture for the mud. However, the porta potties there were so unkept and overflown that a lot of the materials within them leaked out into the nearby dirt, meaning that a lot of the mud that people were bathing in had urine and feces in it. And as the Mudstock tradition goes, you pull people into the mud and get them as muddy as possible.
The mud people live. All these people think they're gonna stay clean. Woodstock 94. Right here. This is it.
Are you one of the guys who's tearing the people into the mud? Were you taking the people into the mud?
New Jacks, they gotta come in.
However, a majority of people playing in the mud were simply making the most of the conditions that I will mention later.
Do people like the mud fights?
One little mud fight and they seem to be having a ball.
So what is the official statement from the mud people here at Woodstock?
The mud is awesome. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Everybody should do it. I don't know why everyone's so clean here.
Griffis Air Force Base had a 12-foot or 3.7 meter plywood and steel fence dubbed as the Peacewall.
Hi, I'm Matteo. I'm from Rome, New York, here at wonderful Griffis Air Force Base with a bunch of other talented artists here who are working on the mural. 2 miles long, going all the way around this entire park. And this has just been a great experience. I mean, how many people just get fed all day long to do art, get a ticket, and have a ball?
This would be documented by the pay-per-view crew and feature a lot of very creative and intricate pieces of art. Surrounding the perimeter of the wall were about 500 state troopers. This Peacewall has an ironic existence that's pointed out by the media. That being the fact that it's supposed to be a wall of peace that would be torn down, vandalized, and stolen in some sections by the end of the event.
All these crazy people breaking down this wall, I think it's badass. I know that it took time to put it up, but it's kind of like a trademark of Woodstock 99.
I'm just destroying the wall for fun, just because I'm at Woodstock.
We want Hendrix to stay.
Why not? That's the real question. We got bored. There's nothing else to do.
Another element of Woodstock culture was physical freedom. Anyone watching the pay-per-view would have noticed the overbearing amount of nudity at the event. Hundreds were walking around naked and flashing themselves throughout the campgrounds. On the surface, this was okay. It's Woodstock, damn it, was the common philosophy, which is supposed to be about honoring that physical freedom. But looking deeper into it, it only enabled people to heckle, dog, and preach others to do the same regardless of their personal comfort.
There was an undercurrent of male aggression, with young women as the all-too-frequent targets.
Just because a girl wants to go crowd surfing or whatever, that doesn't give the guys the right to molest them, you know what I'm saying?
It was disgusting. I was molested, and I hate all men now.
And you would do it again?
Of
course.
This behavior was noticed and criticized by many news media outlets and people attending the event. Of the 44 people that were arrested at Woodstock 99, only one was charged with sexual assault. But to anyone that watched the footage of Woodstock, you would notice something right off the bat. The shouts and chants of "show your tits" that filled the air. You can see footage of women being groped by strangers during many performances. The number of sexual assaults that happened that weekend was nowhere near the amount reported. Here is just several examples of people pointing out the nudity during the event.
Show my tits! You'd have to pay way more than you paid to get in to see my tits.
I ain't showing you all shit. Yo, for real, if you want to see them, you really want to see them? $3.99 at Blockbuster. Do the right thing. Go and order it, baby. All right.
Sometimes there's an abundance of things and sometimes there's a lack. Today there's an abundance of titties.
30 years ago, Woodstock represented the pinnacle of American counterculture. In honoring the Woodstock Festival, the Postal Service have helped to create a fitting, although an ironic, tribute to what is now an American Cultural Institute. We think it's great. Look for the stamp in September. I think the stamp for the 90s is going to be these chicks' titties.
What kind of look is this?
This is Naked Day, Saturday at Woodstock!
Give us a turn. This is the camera.
Hey, what's up? What's up?
Live.
What?
You're live.
Oh, hi. What am I on? What am I on?
That's off working.
Okay. You gonna follow me? What?
Stick with you. You're live right now.
Okay.
Give me a little shake.
Wahoo!
Free Slim Shady.
Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers would actually tell MTV this: "I just don't like it when guys would grab at girls who had their tops off," the bassist wrote. "Guys think and look and fantasize about girls' titties all day, and finally the girl's nice enough and free enough to let them flow, and guys abuse the beauty of it all by groping without invitation? Some nerve." The culture of this event is reminiscent of the party culture of spring breakers. Woodstock was known notoriously as a place that had nudity, drug use, and mud play. As time evolved, I wouldn't doubt that it attracted the likes of pedophiles and predators, with intent to mainly see women take their clothes off. And in some cases, this behavior was enabled, acknowledged, and even encouraged by attendants of all ages and occupations. And here is where Woodstock 99 starts to turn grim. As reported by the media, the main topics of Woodstock 99 that deemed it as a disaster were sexual violence, the 2 to 3 fatalities, overbearing amounts of male aggression and injury during performances, and the fires/declared riot that occurred at the end. We will talk about the mistakes the promoters made, such as pricing and the Peace Patrol, later on in the video, but moving forward, let's talk about this. Out of all 4 of these, sexual violence was the most profound. Which, mind, sexual violence at music festivals is not limited to Woodstock. Sexual assaults and harassment at music festivals is a global issue. That Australian research paper would interview about 500 people. 351 of them believe that sexual harassment occurred at music festivals. There was a 2017 campaign and survey report from an organization called Our Music, My Body. 509 people were surveyed. 47% of respondents experienced unsolicited comments about their body. A reporter that attended Coachella 2018 was reporting for Team Vogue. During the 10 hours of reporting, she was groped 22 times. In addition, 54 women came out and said that they were sexually harassed at the event. BBC would report 2 women that were raped at the 2016 reading festivals in Reading, England. BBC would also report a YouGov survey of 1,188 festival goers. Overall, 22% of all festival goers have faced assault or harassment in some sort of way, and it rises to 30% in consideration of women overall. A Swedish music festival known as Bravalla was cancelled in 2018 due to 23 allegations of sexual assault and 4 rapes. Sexual violence at music festivals has been an ongoing issue throughout the entire world. This requires promoters to act accordingly by making sure security is active and prepared for incidents that are normally neglected. By the end of that weekend, 4 allegations of rape were being investigated by state police. 2 occurred during the performances of KORN and Limp Bizkit respectively. Woodstock 99 had a dwindling security staff that had no idea how to handle moments of sexual violence. A rehabilitation counselor, David Schneider, would witness one of the rapes occurring during the performances of KORN, and I quote, "He saw at least half a dozen men form a circle, pull women into it, and sexually assault them while holding them down. They were literally passing the woman from one guy to another. Over the course of 5 to 10 minutes, he said, he saw 5 or 6 women sexually assaulted." Schneider said he could not see everything that was happening through the dense crowd of nearly 200,000, and estimated he was about 15 to 20 feet from the alleged assault that occurred. This interview would source to the Washington Post, in which they quoted, "There currently wasn't anything I could do. They are big, brawny people, and it seemed like most of the crowd around them were cheering them on." A 24-year-old Pittsburgh woman came out and told police that she was raped on Saturday night while crowd surfing during a set by Limp Bizkit. Utica, New York's YWCA Rape Crisis Director Rosemary Venero reported to MTV that she counseled 4 rape and assault victims who were Woodstock concert goers, which included 2 teenage girls aged 15 and 16 that were among the ones that were violated. Venero also reported that a 23-year-old man that worked as a food vendor told her female workers needed to be accompanied by at least 2 men for protection because some concert goers were groping them. One parent who had her daughter raped posted on the Woodstock website $10,000 to find the assailant. A 20-year-old Buffalo woman was aggressively raped during the fires around 3:30 that Sunday night. She was separated from her friends when an individual approached her offering to help. She declined his help, but the perpetrator continued to follow her until eventually getting fed up and throwing her to the ground. 2 alleged assaults occurred in the camping area, adding 2 more rapes that occurred, exceeding the original report of 4 total. A 32-year-old Ohio woman on Saturday night, and a 20-year-old Virginia woman who was raped by 2 to 3 men. Woodstock 99 clearly had a sexual violence issue. The Woodstock officials had a mixed response to the allegations that they were negligent to these issues. The concert security consultant Dan Flynn reported to New York Times denouncing the reported rapes, stating that it's a statistical probability that a certain number of crimes are going to occur over a period of time with a crowd of that size. Co-producer John Schur would receive backlash after his claims that many of these problems at the event were exaggerated by the media. This is a quote from him. "Once again, you got painted by first MTV, then other journalists as if people were getting raped every 15 feet. It just didn't happen. I'm not denying that it did happen. I'm just saying the nature of journalism is to find this story that most people will want to read about or see about, not diminishing in any way, shape, or form the women that, get exploited." John Schur also chose to blame the women that were walking around with no clothes on. I am critical of hundreds of women that were walking around with no clothes on, and expecting not to be touched. I mean, they shouldn't have been touched, but nevertheless, you are talking about, let's say it was 60-40 men or 70-30 men, average age of early 20s. Hell, do they think what's going to happen if they're going to be walking around naked? Now that's somewhat so chauvinistic and not politically correct. I condemned it, but action, reaction. For every action in this world is an opposite and equal reaction, and that's just the laws of science. So terrible. I hope everybody got caught and got put in jail, but it just wasn't what the press made it out to be. Bad, but not ridiculous. Both Michael Lang and John Schur actually questioned the allegations of rape. Michael Lang stated, "I don't think it's conceivable. You can barely move in a mosh pit. It's worse than a subway at rush hour." And Schur stating that, "What about the 199,000 kids that came and had a great time? Everyone is ignoring them." Despite their cooperation with authorities by providing all the footage that was recorded, the promoters still did not acknowledge that they failed at their attempts to achieve safe and secure concert grounds. Instead, they chose to play it off with a, "Oh, that's normal at events such as these," or "I know we encourage people to be topless, but it's not our fault for these girls being naked." Not only that, but several New York State police troopers were accused of sexual misconduct, mostly for encouraging women to take their clothes off, as reported by MTV. The irony I found was that Michael Lang, co-creator of Woodstock, and John Schur, according to Washington Post, stated, "It was not lost on anyone that Woodstock, once a symbol of counterculture, was saved by the police. There was a time in my life when I didn't trust anyone over 30 and thought that all cops were pigs. The cops here were fantastic." Meanwhile, the Internal Investigations Office of the New York State Police in Albany announced Wednesday that the on-site trooper supervisor was suspended without pay following accusations that he urged female Woodstock attendants to pose naked for photos with police. Jamie Mills, director of the Public Information, said the investigation is continuing.
Well, things are going very nicely. We're about halfway through, and so far so good. The music's been amazing.
Right.
Kids are having a good time. Biggest problem's been a little bit of too warm temperature, but other than that, we're doing great.
It seems so well organized that, and I talked to you out in the field, I snagged you for a moment and said, it seems almost as though you must have immediately started planning after '94. Maybe that's not true by your laugh, Ozzy, but it's so well put together that it seems that way. You started thinking, okay, we're going to do it again, we're going to do it better, and have realized what we did right and what we did wrong. So what did you learn from '94? A couple of big ones.
Well, we learned a lot of things. I mean, we learned that we needed to figure out a way to be able to secure the venue, not just from a commercial perspective, but the people who pay to see this event are entitled to get the goods and services that they paid for.
Right.
And when it becomes a free concert and it's overrun by tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who didn't pay, it's an unfair bargain, and we like to keep our bargain fair. So the concept of putting a Woodstock wall up was born. It was born by observing how some other people did different kinds of events, and then
This interview makes it clear that these promoters had no awareness whatsoever on what was actually going on at the event. On one side, these three were clearly commercializing the event while also not committing to their responsibilities of keeping the event secure, with the addition of them choosing to doubt the news entirely. But on the other side, there was some truth in their words, one being that the crimes committed were fractional in comparison to the United States' 1999 rate of 32.8 incidents of rape per 100,000. And there are some cases where many of the women in the audience were not bothered with being groped due to the spring break-esque culture of Woodstock 99.
And you would do it again?
Of course.
I'll talk more about this at the end. The population of Woodstock was massive, and a chunk of that population developed a stigma towards the people that were dogging girls into revealing themselves.
Really stupid humans around here who have, like, all we've been hearing is show us your show us your I don't understand. There's great music happening. They paid all this money. We're gonna see what the bottom's for, man. Hey, all right. Show me your you know, show us your brain.
I found, however, that these three were at fault for not being responsible for the mistakes the event made. There was no apologies or serious acknowledgement to the people that were violated and had a bad time at Woodstock 99. Michael Lang would even claim that he had no control over the event and labeled it as MTV stock. Lang was the producer and the concert organizer. He was the man on the podium that had to respond to the claims that happened on Sunday, and he is choosing to play the victim card.
Very small group of people who were determined to screw this thing up. They went from place to place, setting fires, inciting people. For the most part, the rest of the crowd had nothing to do with it. There were a lot of onlookers, of course, because they were right there in the middle of it, but I certainly would not condemn this crowd for the up of a, excuse the language, of a few assholes.
As I mentioned earlier, some news media outlets dropped the ball by either getting information wrong or tried to make the event seem more deadly than it actually was. One example for this is the 2 recorded deaths that took place at Woodstock 99. Insider and its source being the Huffington Post would both falsely report that there was no fatalities, which they both chose to cover mostly the fires and the riots at the end. However, someone did die during that 3-day weekend. That man was David DeRosa, age 24. While moshing in the pit during Metallica's set, David collapsed after suffering from hyperthermia, probably secondary to heat stroke. The Ringer covered his story in their series. In his final journal entry at 6:52 p.m. on Saturday, July 24th, DeRosa concludes with this: "Now to build up strength, because I'm going into the pit." His mother would sue the people running the event for being negligent. An article done by Huffington Post in 2014 failed to mention this. MTV would do the opposite. They over-reported the number of deaths related to the event, increasing it to 3, adding the death of a 44-year-old Massachusetts man with a pre-existing heart condition who died Friday of cardiac arrest at the campground site. MTV would also mention the death of Tara Weaver. While experiencing car trouble in South New Berlin, New York, about 55 miles away from the concert site, she was hit by a passing vehicle. Woodstock 1969 had 3 deaths, 2 overdoses, and 1 person who was killed accidentally by a tractor driver. Woodstock 94 had 2 deaths, but both were from pre-existing conditions. One was from a ruptured spleen, and another was from complications relating to diabetes. To say Woodstock 99 was more deadly than the original Woodstock would be an overstatement. Tara Weaver's death is tragic due to being an unnecessary accident that took the life of someone young. However, besides the fact that Weaver was leaving Woodstock 99, there is no correlation that her death had anything to do with the event whatsoever. She was 55 miles off campus. MTV included her death as filler to add up to Woodstock's death toll. My point being is that some media outlets were trying to extract the drama from the event, making it hard to decipher fact from fiction. This is especially present during the performances that occurred during the 3-day weekend. The next chapter will be on that. Many media sources would point the blame at the lineup of angsty nu metal bands as the source of the violence at the end of the event. The lineup consisted of these genres. This lineup would attract a variety of fans throughout all of North America, resulting in a vast demographic of audience members. However, the performances that took the most of the media's interest were the heavier bands. Genres like nu metal was developing a negative reputation, attracting the likes of teenagers that developed a hatred towards ideals incorporated in today's society, leading a lot of people to speculate that white guy anger was a root cause of the disorderly actions that happened on Sunday, also claiming that Fred Durst, KORN, and Rage Against the Machine had nothing to do with the peace and love movement that Woodstock became known for. In exchange, they were believing that these bands were insinuating angry people to destroy the venue, thus pointing the blame towards the artists themselves. Consider that perspective as we discuss the performances that took the strongest interest. First up, it's ICP. ICP's performance was bizarre, but that's the usual feeling one gets with their performance. Violent J would open dozens of bottles of Faygo and punt it into the crowd. Some of these bottles would miss the crowd almost entirely, splattering onto security, which I'm sure were not happy about it. While the initial splash would be rather refreshing, the overbearing amount of sugar in the soft drink would most likely attract bugs, which are abundant in the summer of upstate New York. ICP would be under fire from a segment when they launched rubber balls with $100 bills taped to them.
I know that for Woodstock, tickets were a little expensive. And me and Shaggy, we got paid a lot of money to be here. So we decided to give you all your money back.
After in which they would do the same, except with much larger rubber balls carrying $500 attached to them. ICP also had a segment in their performance where 2 people impersonated police officers. They were trying to end the show due to too many people getting hurt, but got smashed through a table by the band. The San Francisco Chronicle described it as this: "Insane clown posse started the ball rolling by throwing $100 bills into the audience and watching gleefully while a melee ensued." The melee ensued? Here's the footage of the crowd going after the ball. There was no melee. It was just a bunch of people reaching for a rubber ball. This article is making a poor assumption of the entire crowd, that everyone that went to Woodstock 99 were aggressive. ICP did do the best they could to make the event fun by using water buckets and squirt guns to cool off the crowd. ICP's performance didn't cause the crowd to be as violent as it would get on Saturday and Sunday, because by this point, most of the problems of the event were shrugged off. Only a select few realized that the event was on the brink of disaster. KORN's performance at Woodstock 99 was outstanding. The energy of the crowd was insane. It could be clearly seen during their performance of their song, Blind. Jonathan even brought out the old bagpipes for a moment there. However, this would lead to a significant amount of moshing. Polestar would reference Jason Prichette, an artist development coordinator and an IDJ. He stated that the stage started shaking when they started. That was frightening. The article then stated, Davis goaded people, yelling, "I want to see how many motherfuckers out there can get naked. This is Woodstock, goddammit." A gang rape reportedly took place in the mosh pit during KORN set, and it wasn't the festival's last. This article is making this implication that Davis's words were to incite the crowd to literally get naked. I didn't know this, but apparently get naked is actually a slang term to mean to let loose and have a good time. Using that followed by a fact is attempting to associate those two clauses, implying that KORN was the reason why that rape occurred. Polestar was deliberately trying to make it seem like people attending this was scared and frightened by the amount of energy of the giving crowd. This energy was a blessing in the eyes of the artists that took part in it. That crowd energy fuels the performance of the artist. The artists that performed at this event were simply doing their jobs. You can't expect them to notice particular crowd behaviors while they're performing. KORN's performance was intense and had a lot of similar issues found throughout the event as a whole, but it did not display the same magnitude of violence that occurred on Saturday and Sunday. Kid Rock had a rather strong performance. Joe C was there in a "I'm not a fucking midget" shirt. Sad to say this, but this would be one of Joe C's last performances before his death in November of 2000. Bobby came out in a fur coat in 90-degree weather and eventually took it off. Their set lasted for about 59 minutes. I'm not a huge Kid Rock fan, but their performance was rather entertaining. The most talked about part was their finale.
Now when we kick this beat in for the last time, I want to see every possible thing flying through the fucking air, but nothing that can hurt each other. These plastic bottles, let's have some fucking fun, y'all.
The crowd obliged by pelting hundreds of plastic water bottles onto the stage. This would be one of 3 occasions, once during Wyclef Jean's performance of the Star-Spangled Banner, and another during Sevendust's set. This was symbolic in the eyes of many. Due to the ridiculous prices of water, this was a way to acknowledge the issue. It also gives an idea of the overbearing amount of trash that was on the ground. The 1999 article covered by the San Francisco Chronicle did not age well, so get this. If right-wingers want to throw a punch at musicians for inspiring bad behavior among America's youth, they could lay off poor Marilyn Manson, whose worst influence is his fashion directive. But they'd be dead on if they pointed to the likes of Kid Rock, Insane Clown Posse, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and especially Limp Bizkit. The article would describe the Kid Rock bottle throwing segment as, "It looked like a plague of locusts, with Rock himself having to seek shelter from the hail of plastic projectiles." That's not what happened. This article was clearly dramatizing. Plastic water bottles weigh about 12 to 20 grams depending on the material. That's nowhere near a tenth of a pound. And with the 90-degree weather and $4 for a bottle of water, there was no way any of these bottles would be full enough to hurt somebody. And if someone did throw a glass bottle, he most likely would have gotten the shit kicked out of him.
One, the always Limp Bizkit.
The most talked about performance at Woodstock 99 is Limp Bizkit's performance. Some would point the blame for the chaos towards Fred Durst. This was due to him being oblivious to the crowd's actions and his insubordination to the directors. Some would even say he encouraged the crowd to riot. Limp Bizkit's set would last for about an hour long, and it consisted of many pauses. These pauses were due to the overwhelming amount of injuries that were coming to the medical tent that began after the first track, just like this. After the song 1999, Durst was informed that he needs to mellow the crowd down.
Many people are getting hurt. Don't let nobody get hurt. But I don't think you should mellow.
Into the set, Limp Bizkit was performing their hit Break Stuff. After the first verse, he told the crowd to you begin to see people writing pieces of plywood. The lyrics of Limp Bizkit's track state, "My suggestion is to keep your distance, cause right now, I'm dangerous. We've all felt like shit, and been treated like shit. All those motherfuckers, they want to step up. I hope you know, I pack a chainsaw, I'll skin your ass raw, and if my day keeps going this way, I just might break something tonight." Some would say that the concert goers took this rather too literally, as they began to dismantle both the Peacewall and the center music tower. This resulted in the occupants of the tower to ditch it, after in which even more members in the crowd began to surf and ride on pieces of plywood. Others were catapulting themselves high into the air, resulting in dozens of injuries that overwhelmed the medical tent even further. The directors would then cut Durst's mic for a moment. Suddenly, Durst notices the plywood and asks if he could surf to it to the center music tower. The first piece of wood was disregarded by security. After a couple minutes, another piece of wood arrives. Durst would request the crowd if he could surf to the center music tower again, after which too much time was wasted and the set needed to finish. They would play a cover song, Faith, by George Michael. Durst would finish the entire song on a piece of plywood, during in which the crowd and security would have a tug of war due to the miscommunication of that whole event. Immediately after Bizkit's performance, Durst told a news outlet that the mayhem was,
"Dude, it's not our fault. That's all I can say."
This wasn't the first time he'd be accused of starting a riot. There was another incident that took place at Live 105 show at Northern California Shoreline Amphitheater, after in which he told the audience to rush security and the stage.
Just think about it.
Limp Bizkit's 1999 music video for Rearranged would be an act of rebellion against the events at Woodstock 99 and other concerts where they were accused of starting a riot. The video displays the band being imprisoned, later in which they testify in court while footage of concerts is being played in front of a jury. A stream of newspapers with accusations of the band would then display, ending with the band drowning to death as a result of capital punishment. Fred Durst's attitude at Woodstock 99 was immature and rebellious, but I wouldn't say he insinuated a riot. Limp Bizkit did exactly what they do every single night. They performed, worked up the crowd, and got them moving. A lot of people got hurt due to Fred Durst's failure to calm them down, but the crowd was already pretty worked up, so there was not really much Durst could really do to change it. I think that pointing the finger at Durst is not really seeing the big picture of the whole event.
One thing I'm not seeing here. Okay, I won't say that.
Rage Against the Machine's performance was pretty lit. Really nothing in this set stands out except during their performance of Killing in the Name of, where they burned an American flag. One commenter would actually point out to the lyrics of their opening track, No Shelter, which states, "Empty your pockets, son, they got you thinking that. What you need is what they sellin', make you think that buy-in is rebellin'." Tom Morello has talked about Woodstock 99 at least twice. Once as an opinion piece for the New York Times, where he stated, "Hey man, leave the kids alone. I've had enough of the frenzied demonization of young people surrounding Woodstock 99. Yes, Woodstock 99 was filled with predators, the degenerate idiots who assaulted those women, the greedy promoters who wronged every cent out of the thirsty concert goers, and last but not least, the predator media that turned a blind eye to real violence and scapegoated the 250,000 music fans at Woodstock 99, the vast majority of whom had the time of their lives. Morello had a different take on the matter these days. In an interview for the book Louder Than Hell, he stated, "For me, Woodstock 99 was the low point of nu metal. The rapes in the pit, the trashing of the sites, it just seemed like it distilled the worst elements of metal, the misogynist jock buggery, and the message wasn't announced as, this is a horrible thing. It was more like, this is our new Woodstock generation. A bunch of idiots." The performance of Megadeth and Metallica were rather tamed in comparison to the energy that was projected by KORN and Limp Bizkit. Ideally, it's important to remember that a majority of the acts that performed at Woodstock went smoothly and peacefully, with all things considered. I wanted to briefly talk about this, but during the Tragically Hip's performance, there was accusations of xenophobia. In Rolling Stone's article, 19 Worst Things About Woodstock, it stated that the crowd was getting their xenophobia on when long-running Canadian alt-rockers Tragically Hip started singing "O Canada." The same crowd that cheered when Rage Against the Machine lit an American flag on fire was somehow patriotic enough to shout back the Star-Spangled Banner, and also, according to Spin, threw rocks and bottles. The article done by Spin is heavily referenced by the media. Out of all the coverage of Woodstock 99, this one was the most descriptive, providing an hour-by-hour detail of the event. However, I can't even find this incident after watching the entire Tragically Hip performance. I'm not doubting its existence, but I am doubting that enough people were mad enough to deem the whole crowd as xenophobic. And as a matter of fact, during the whole Tragically Hip performance, you can see dozens holding up Canadian flags in the air with no problem whatsoever. The Rolling Stones' use of this incident was definitely filler for their publication. Maureen Callahan was a journalist for Spin, and in a 2019 interview, she had this to say: "I was working at Spin at the time. Our issue was pretty much closed, and I remember we had this meeting about whether we should scrap a good chunk of it and try to report out what went wrong as best we could, beginning to end, about how these rapes and riots and lawlessness and fires happened. It was a real challenge to find the girls who had been hurt, but in the final tally, at least when we finished our reporting, there were 5 of them. I believe the number is probably way higher." The Spin news crew realized that the event showed signs of being a disaster, so instead of creating a neutral story, they decided it would be best to cover just the bad, which granted, their story is highly descriptive and provided support to the issue of sexual violence at the event. However, this article was taken up by other news media outlets, leading to an escalation.
I have a question for you. Eileen said that there wasn't any violence per se, but I mean, the damage to the trucks, is that not violence in your eyes?
It depends on how you would define all of that. Certainly it was demolition, but certainly looking at a news truck here with $5,000 to $10,000 worth of damage to it, one might call that violence in a way.
The actual riot that was being reported placed on Sunday night during Chili Peppers' Jimi Hendrix cover of Fire. Fire was chosen because it was the most practiced Hendrix song. They covered it back in 1991. Unbeknownst to the band, the anti-teenage violence group PAX distributed about 100,000 peace candles for fans to light near the finale of their show. Angry festival goers used these candles to start bonfires. Due to the large amount of trash on the ground and the abundance of pulled plywood from the Peacewall, the small fires grew into larger ones, being noticeable on camera during Chili Peppers' performance. According to the drummer Chad Smith, "I noticed like far away, and you got to remember this place was huge, so it looked like a mile away, was this kind of fire or something smoking, and it literally looked like a little hamburger stand had a grease fire or something. It looked like nothing from where we were at." In the middle of Chili Pepper's set, John Schur decides to disclose the issue.
Calm down a minute, whoa. As you can see, if you look behind you, we have a bit of a problem. Chili Peppers are gonna come back, calm down. We got 3 days through. There's only a couple of 100,000 of you guys, but we need your help. So let's back away, let's let the fire department do their job.
They didn't do that. After the end of Red Hot Chili Peppers' set, there was rumors going around that the staff had a finale planned. This wasn't true. The show was over, and people didn't like that. Eventually, explosions from propane tanks used by vendors were being heard. This scared a lot of people as some began to disperse. This would result in the fences surrounding the venue to be taken down by the fleeing crowd. TV crews, vendors, and people on the job were either fleeing or were already gone. The remaining several hundred people stayed. Vehicles began to be flipped, fires grew even bigger, vendor tables and ATMs were looted.
Mass chaos. Probably like a $20 value box of them. How much did you pay for them? Free!
And some concert goers even left trash art left behind. There was at least one report of someone throwing Molotov cocktails. Footage of the fiasco mostly consisted of people surrounding the fires.
Hey, can I get a shot of the media? How about that, huh? You guys are in trouble. You shouldn't be here. She's putting this out. She's putting it out. She should be putting this out. Taking pictures.
The crowd would also form drumming circles using barrels that were found around the complex. State riot officers arrived to disperse the crowd. A small number of people would retaliate by throwing glass bottles and bricks at the officers, resulting in it to be declared a riot. This, however, was minimal. Most people left after the arrival of authorities. By Wednesday, August 4th, the event tallied at 39 arrests, 96 criminal investigations, 60 hospitalizations, and thousands suffering from some kind of injury. This was reported by MTV. The next day, Griffis Air Force Base was turned into a wasteland of garbage. Police would be present telling people to vacate the area. Several media sources would arrive to cover the story, many condemning the actions that happened last night. The rioting would hit news outlets everywhere.
It looks like an absolute war zone inside here. I can't tell you.
It's Woodstock. I wish we had all been naked.
This is the video of Woodstock 99 nobody dared to air.
Authorities say the weekend went relatively smoothly before tonight.
Stages are gorgeous. The wall is being fine-tuned.
Fires at first grew into out-of-control blazes. Soon, the concert goers were out of control too.
Many sources dubbing the incident as the death of music. But there was another side to the rioting. A site that I found on angelfire.com had an article titled Greedstock 99. Why we rioted. I saw the bonfires on the horizon and decided to check it out. When I got there, it was total chaos. Vendor tents were being pulled up and burned. People were dancing in the cesspool around rings of fire engulfing the remains of corporate profiteering. And that's when they toppled the sound tower. It was pulled down and people started climbing on it and dismantling the remains. The security was nowhere to be found. They were probably too busy emptying coolers of concertgoers to help get people out of there. I looked for my girlfriend some more, again receiving no help, and then wandered back to see the chaos. When I arrived at the trucks, several people were smashing the windows out of a rig. I came around the left side of the row of trucks to see hundreds of bottles flying through the air. Someone offered me free water, and I took it, dying of thirst and eternally grateful. I quickly became aware that everything was free when I came around to the other side of the trucks. People were instead handing out soda and water from the trucks to everyone. Thousands of bottles were hurtled through the air at the trucks and poured on the ground in protest of what we had survived. One kid walked around with a case of water saying, "I am Woodstock, $5 a bottle, pay up." This drew applause and laughter from the crowd nearby. I saw several of the trucks go up in flames, draped by the remains of a destroyed vendor tent. This ensued for about an hour until the riot police showed up. When they rolled in on their ATVs, it coincided with the first explosion from a vendor truck. Most people, including myself, thought they had opened fire on the crowd and started running. When I saw people hurtling bottles at the police, I knew that things had taken a turn for the worst. That's when I left through a hole in the wall and made the 3-mile trek back to my tent from the east stage. Looking back, all I could see was a cloud of black smoke and a fire piercing the night sky. It burned for hours. This article would claim that a majority of the injuries that took place at this riot were accidental, and most of the acts committed were Robin Hoodistic. It was not the music that fueled aggression, it was not a generation gone bad, it was the corporate profiteering that incited anger, and it was a generation standing up for its rights. Washington Post would interview cultural critic Stephen Hayden. Hayden is known for his podcast with Ringer titled Break Stuff, the story of Woodstock 99. The riot was really about violence against the festival, Hayden said. One attendee he interviewed told him that he felt safer during the riots. We're gonna set fires, we're gonna steal pretzels, we're gonna steal t-shirts because it's gonna hurt the people we feel have been taking advantage of us for the past 3 days. As time evolved, people that attended the event despised the way the media handled it. Some articles and story were permissive, but as I showed you, articles like the San Francisco Chronicle and Polestar would instead choose to criminalize the crowd. Other articles would use it as an excuse to flex politics, as it did with the Rolling Stone. The Rolling Stone would have a link titled Woodstock 99 Riots, What Actually Happened. The dude writing the article admitted that he missed certain parts of the festival because he was too busy sitting in the hangar typing the story. By the time the fires happened, he only knew half the story, blaming white guy anger as the main cause. This resulted in a backlash of comments. I wouldn't say white guy anger is entirely the cause of the riot that occurred. I understand that bands like Kid Rock, Limp Bizkit, and KORN would most certainly attract angrier young males to the event, but if white guy anger was the cause, then why isn't every nu metal, hardcore, and punk show end with a riot? That's because the anger that existed that weekend was real. The anger was a result of the way the promoters handled the event. This next chapter, I will discuss why the riots happened.
Get down! The riot police are coming!
They found fans feeding and fleeing the fires.
Everybody wants to get nuts, everybody wants to get crazy, and they just got a little out of hand, started pulling down the walls around the speaker towers. Total devastation. Bloodthirsty maniacs trying to kill me.
Why they started the fires is still unknown.
I can't give you an explanation. I guess they were just kids blowing off some steam, but it got out of hand. In this case, my sense is that it was a mistake, that these kids did not intend to do what happened.
But it did.
Commercialization of the event is a good place to start. As many would not be surprised, Woodstock was always a capitalistic venture. Michael Lang would admit that he had idolized counterculture back then and wanted to profit off of it. Him, Roberts, Rosamond, and Cornfield would get together to make Woodstock Ventures, and they spent nearly $3.1 million, $15 in today's money, on Woodstock 1969, and only took in $1.8 million. Due to Roberts' wealthy family, they agreed to temporarily cover the enormous costs, providing that they were repaid. They would eventually be repaid in the 1980s. This was with the help of movie and music royalties. Following Woodstock 1969, music became much more big business. Woodstock 94 was going to need to be different. The estimated cost for Woodstock 94 was right around $30 million, 4 times the budget of Woodstock 1969. Woodstock 94 was starting to develop a reputation by attendees as being a commercialized event. As a matter of fact, the band Guns N' Roses were asked to appear at the festival. Band declined due to internal problems, as well as a feeling that the concert was too commercial. However, lead guitarist Slash did make an appearance with Paul Rogers. Business-wise, the event was far from successful. Merchandise and pay-per-view sales did not meet expectations. A report from August earlier that same year would say that insiders say that the company is still $8 million to $10 million shy of recouping its $40 million plus investment. I'm not saying that commercialization is 100% bad, but what I am saying is from the perspective of the people running the event, their main intent was to make a profit instantaneously instead of waiting for the profit to slowly come in as it did in the beginning. In order for that profit to happen, they were going to need to make some drastic changes. According to Schur, the main issue that the promoters addressed was the issue of security at Woodstock 94. People were getting in for free, and that's where the venue change came in. Woodstock 1999 was conveniently located at 1,100 acres on Griffis Air Force Base in Rome, New York, which cost about $750,000 to rent for the weekend. What many people didn't know was that Griffis Air Force Base was a Superfund site, meaning the government reported, and I quote, "As a result of various national defense missions carried out at the former Griffis AFB since 1942, hazardous and toxic substances were used and hazardous wastes were generated, stored, or disposed of at various sites on tile installation. Solvents, lead, and PCBs have been disposed in landfills and dry wells. This contaminated 3 Mile Creek and 6 Mile Creek. These contaminants were still found in the creek and was reported in 2003. The water sources at the event were contaminated, and people were showering, bathing, drinking, and absorbing it. The original map of Woodstock 99 presents this look as an event taking place on a green natural landscape that included camping with trees, the path leading up to the stage being grass, a place to play Sony PlayStations. However, most of the grass that's displayed on this map isn't real grass. It is hot tarmac surrounded by rocky dirt. Most of the trees were limited and spread out. And to top things off, the weather was approaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It turns out that an hour away in Cooperstown, New York, that same weekend, the Baseball Hall of Fame induction ceremony was occurring, causing hours of delays and bumper-to-bumper traffic that many reported. The Peacewall's first purpose was to keep people out. Adding the commissioned artist to create murals on it was secondary. People knew this, which could have possibly contributed to people tearing it down and writing profit stock on it. Ironically, security was supposed to be priority by the promoters, as I showed in a clip, but the promoters' foolproof plan of having a peace patrol crumbled by the end of the event. The amount of security at the event that started was right around 3,100 private security guards, and Woodstock called these people the Peace Patrol. Here are some reports about the Peace Patrol. A lot of them were fired before the festival even started because they were intimidating other guards. There were stories about guards stealing from other guards in the barracks. Security guards were housed in dilapidated conditions, and there were stories of some trashing the accommodation. Over the weekend, half of 1,200 hired security personnel had either been fired or walked out. According to Art Reed, a security supervisor on the South Gate, that they had an incident sometime around noon on Saturday where 200 guards quit. The head of supervision for the security held a quick meeting and said he placed another emergency call to the correctional facilities to try to get 200 correctional guards to replace them. Nobody came. According to a dude by the name of O'Neill, I remember the security guards taking off their shirts and being like, "I'm off duty." And I was like, nope, I'm not wearing that. This is not my pay grade. The chaos wasn't worth the money. The Peace Patrol lacked training and the proper procedures to handle the serious issues such as sexual violence. And most of the security was focused at the entrance of the festival and near the stages, with their main assignments being dumping out the coolers of contraband food and water onto the ground and protecting the band from people going onto the stage. But after performances such as ICP, where large amounts of cola were getting splashed on these people, these small little incidents were adding up, causing people from the Peace Patrol to quit on the spot, meaning that by Sunday, there was no way to report anything. Security had no communication, and there was just nothing you could do about it. Ticket prices costed $150 plus service charges. Some sources say $180 by scalpers at the door. The cost for a bottle of water, small cup of coffee, a bag of chips, or peanuts cost $4. Lemonade, which was reported as diluted, was $3. Single-serve pizza, like Tombstone pizzas, cost $12. Neon wristbands were $10. Candles, which were priced at $10 to $100. And there were plenty of recreational activities on site, including massages and a skate park. But all of these activities costed extra. Vendors paid Woodstock $500, or about $770 in 2019, to sell at Woodstock during the 4-day event.
8:30 they made a roll call. The gates are officially open. So that means instead of 12 noon when they said we'd open, it's now 8:30.
All in, Steve spent $6 grand for a booth. Another $4 to get his team here.
It's my selling domain.
It's not his domain yet.
So their prices were inflated as well. And this is an event that required a lot of walking, and the climate was reaching high into the 90s. These two combined can add up to the needed calories that a human would need in order to be able to function. How could you afford to feed yourself with these prices? You'd either have to take out more cash than you thought you would and give in to the cost, or you would have to risk traveling in traffic for food off campus, which could take hours. And it wasn't just the food that the organizers gypped the concert goers with, water as well.
It's very important to keep drinking. You don't have to buy liquids. You don't have to buy soda. There's plenty of free water. Try to keep cool.
These fountains had very, very long lines, and actually were in very poor conditions as some reported. One person says, there was free water on site, but it was very difficult to access, and not just because of the queues. There were these really crummy water fountains where the water barely came out of the spout, so you had to put your mouth right up on it if you wanted to get any water. They were also right about the porta potties, which were not emptied and were overflowing. The positioning of the fountains wasn't the only problem. Some fountains' water sources would be shut off entirely.
We woke up one morning, there was no damn water for like half a day, man. I mean, everybody was bumming, this was hot as hell. And excuse my language, but there were like no water, man. It was like they're trying to kill us in here, you know, and everybody was mad about that.
There was a lot of frustration about $10 burritos, you know, and $5 hot dogs, things like that. So that's what we were catching when people were coming by. They were throwing bottles at the vendors and, you know, fuck you, fuck Woodstock, fuck Michael Lang. And
as Martin Luther King Jr. once said, a riot is the language of the unheard. The debate on calling Woodstock 99 a riot can depend on how you see it. The actions committed by the so-called couple hundred knuckleheads were acts of thievery and vandalism, which are clearly illegal and unnecessary. However, these people did feel gypped, an overwhelming feeling of frustration of being mistreated and unheard. So however you want to justify that, it depends on your morality. Alright guys, let's sum everything up. Woodstock 1969 was a huge event that influenced American history. This festival would be known for 3 days of peace and music. However, following the return of the event in the 90s, Woodstock evolved into a counterculture that idolized nudity, drug use, and mud fights. These were mostly all in good fun, but these elements most likely attracted toxic people to the event, including pedophiles and predators. Woodstock 99 had 8 allegations of rape and dozens of allegations of sexual assault. Music festivals in general have a terrible reputation for sexual violence that can be found globally. But what caused Woodstock 99's downfall was not the attendees, it was how they were treated. Whoever they put in charge of security failed at their job, because half of security staff quit, and the other half had no organization or procedures to handle extreme cases of sexual violence that did occur. The organizers did not organize anything well other than the lineup of the bands. They picked Griffis Air Force Base to stop people from getting in for free. The Woodstock 99 officials were pushing the bar by charging ridiculous prices. Sanitation and water was neglected, and the only available sources of water were in terrible condition. And regardless of the 90-degree weather on hot tarmac, bottled water still stood fixed at $4. The promoters were clearly practicing profiteering. This was most likely one of the causes of the riot. The riot that occurred felt exaggerated by some media outlets. These media outlets were selling the riot, choosing a perspective of criminalizing the fans and artists at the event, many dubbing the entire crowd as angry, misogynistic, and perverted. Concert promoters John Schur and Michael Lang were at fault for many reasons. 1, they chose to downplay the reported rapes that occurred over the weekend. 2, they refused to take any admirable responsibility for the mistakes that the venue neglected the concertgoers' basic human needs. 3, they were hypocritical to make a point that security was a major goal, and then after failing doing so, didn't even bother to mention it again. 4, they pushed the blame away from themselves, pushing the blame towards a couple hundred knuckleheads and media exaggeration. Lastly, it was clear that they were lazy the whole time, not even trying to secure anything other than their paycheck. If they did try, they would have known by late Friday the mistakes that they made, because there were rumors already going around. Instead, it seemed like all they did was sit there and let everything slowly fall apart. The culture of Woodstock was known for glorifying nudity and drug use, and this was enabled by the promoters, which isn't radically a bad thing. But when you create an environment that encourages it, it does not just alienate people, but it enables other people to pressure those ideals onto people that want no part of it. It gives off an implication that this is appropriate behavior. And despite all that, they did have a point in their defense. First and more respectively, the two chose to not condemn the crowd. The media was indeed exaggerating the event. Out of the 400,000 people that were there that weekend, only a fraction of that population had a horrible time. The promoters also assisted with investigations of crimes by providing video footage to authorities. The two could have done better, but they do deserve some credit for defending the crowd. After watching several hours of the pay-per-view, I noticed that for the most of it, I was looking for the disaster. A good majority of the acts that played displayed a lot of the people in the crowd that weekend made the most of it, creating an experience that will never be forgotten. The number of perspectives at Woodstock 99 was far greater than any project I've ever worked on. And after 3 months of working and studying this event and getting to the point that I'm at now, I still feel like I don't know the entire situation. But one thing that was clear to me, it wasn't Limp Bizkit, KORN, or Woodstock culture that killed rock music. It was the deceitful, capitalistic mentality backed behind it. And don't get me wrong, events like these are tremendous for the economy of the area they are located, boosting revenues for businesses both large and small. However, when money goes before the health and well-being of others, I think it can only do harm. Woodstock 99 was not the only disaster that was a result of profiteering over the well-being of attendees. If you are interested in learning more, I recommend learning about the 2017 Fire Festival. Perhaps in the future I can do a video on that. Last paragraph, guys. At the end of the day, Lang and Schur have moved on from Woodstock 99, and they're not the only ones. The two would continue to promote and run shows, including the cancelled Woodstock 50 in 2019. Lang would write a bestseller titled The Road to Woodstock in 2009. How you choose to see Lang and Schur for the mistreatment of Woodstock is up to you. I don't think Lang and Schur meant for the event to end in shambles, cause the two really did share a passion for music. They simply wanted to replicate the good time at Woodstock 1969. But failed horrendously. But one thing is for sure, their attempts to create a music festival of peace and love will forever be remembered in the Uncle Unbated archive. Thanks for watching this entire thing. Holy shit. Thanks, man. See you next time.
These things do happen at mass gatherings, and there was a tiny percentage of knuckleheads.
Would you want to do this again?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to do it again unless there was a way that we felt completely confident that the
MTV News was forced to get off of home base. We felt it was too dangerous. There were people throwing glass bottles everywhere. We had to MTV Tower, people had to be evacuated. It was in all of the In all of the concerts I've seen, I have never seen anything quite so out of hand as this. It was violent, it was dangerous, it was hostile, and my question for you is, why did no one from either security or the organization walk out to Fred Durst and say, man, can you ask these kids to chill? There were kids, I talked to kids later who were petrified out there, and I'm sorry, I'm not grinding.
Excuse me, do you have a question? Please come up here and editorialize to everybody, or let me answer the question. Either one.
Of Woodstock. I think it's lovely. We'll have to do this more often.
You like it?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Tell them how you feel about it.
I love everybody, but I think it's going to be brutal. It's going to be a bloodbath. They're going to terrorize everybody. God bless you. I love you.